What does a relationship look like between a Type 8 Challenger and a Type 9 Peacemaker? Well, let's start off by talking about a few things they have in common. Well, friends, this first section is going to be a little different than normal because 8s and 9s are about as different as two Enneagram types can be. However, this is the perfect time to reiterate the fact that we all have a little bit of every single Enneagram type within us. There are no personality boxes here, and everything comes back to the most important shape within the Enneagram, which is the circle, as it symbolizes that we all have a little bit of these traits within us to some degree. Now, speaking of the shape of the Enneagram, it may seem odd that two incredibly different types are right next to each other. But that's your signal that there are likely going to be more complementary traits than shared traits, which is sort of like being on opposite sides of the same coin. So there's often this inherent connection between their differences that actually makes the relationship feel more enjoyable, effective, or natural in some way. All that to say, while 8s and 9s may not have a ton of identical personality traits on the surface, they do have many complementary traits, which I'll talk more about in the next section. For now though, here's what they do have in common. First, 8s and 9s are each other's wing. So an 8-wing 9 can be the strong silent type, aka the bear, while a 9-wing 8 can be the more assertive peacemaker, aka the referee. In general, this wing overlap causes a shared desire for a stable home life where there's equal parts safety and sensuality, if you will. Now, while many 9s may seem aloof or a little whimsical on the surface, they can actually be very passionate people that are capable of meeting the more overtly intense 8's desire for intimacy if they feel secure in the relationship. Furthermore, both 8s and 9s are gut or body types within the triad centers, which means they feel most alive when they're physically active because that grounds them in the present moment. However, as gut types, they also have a tendency to mistrust or misinterpret their instinctive desire to take action. So for 9s, they avoid taking any action at all by slipping into their imagination, which is a combination of the head and the heart, while 8s justify their actions by leaning into the cold rationality of the mind. The point being that these two seemingly different types have a shared desire to act freely and to have a tangible impact on their physical environment, be it to feel in control or to feel peace of mind, or both. All right, before we get any deeper into these nuanced Enneagram theories, let's shift gears and take a look at those complementary traits that attract the Type 8 Challenger to the Type 9 Peacemaker, and vice versa. One primary reason that 8s are attracted to 9s is because they naturally defer to the 8's leadership. 8s love being in charge, and 9s adapt to what their partners love because that helps minimize conflict and maximize a sense of harmony within the relationship. This goes a long way in soothing the 8's ego that craves a sense of control, especially in regard to their most intimate relationships. 8s also enjoy that 9s become deeply attached to their partners, which means the 8 not only gets to be in the driver's seat, but they also get an extremely committed partner riding shotgun. Furthermore, 8s have a very hard time containing their anger, so their loved ones often have to endure frequent or intense waves of frustration directed not only at the external world, but at them personally. Fortunately for 8s in this relationship, the 9 is a master at blocking out negative emotions, almost to a fault. Now, if we take a look at the harmonic triad, which describes the major coping mechanisms of each type, you'll see that 8s are reactive types, while 9s are in the positive outlook group. That means that when disaster strikes, or even some mild irritations, the 8 wears their emotional reactions on their sleeve, while 9s stay optimistic and point to the silver lining. At times, this can irritate the 8 that feels like the 9 isn't as concerned as they should be about some issue in their life. But for the most part, 8s benefit immensely from the 9's positive outlook, especially when it's directed at their interactions with the 8, because it makes them incredibly patient and forgiving of all the 8's rough edges. In fact, many 9s often become this kind of mediator for the aggressive or frankly off-putting behavior of the 8 in their family or friend group. Sometimes 8s don't even realize how much the 9 is responsible for them still being invited to social outings and family get-togethers. But of course, the healthier 8s are hyper-aware that the 9 is the embodiment of the kinder, gentler person they know they can be, which looks like the 8's movement of integration to the more tender and sensitive Type 2 helper. I won't go into that too much here, but if you want to learn more about the movements of integration and disintegration, be sure to check out the complete guide to Enneagram 8s that I've got linked in the description below. All right, those are just a few things that attract Enneagram 8s to Enneagram 9s. Time now to flip the script and talk about what attracts Enneagram 9s to 8s. It often takes someone as universally accepting as the 9 is to fall in love with the more prickly 8s out there. But it actually happens all the time, as 9s just love the energy that 8s bring to their relationship. It's also important to know that all 9s feed off the energy of people closest to them. It's what makes them naturally empathetic, as well as making them naturally indecisive. 9s just see all people and all options as equally good, so having someone close by with a strong opinion and a clear sense of direction can actually alleviate a lot of the stress that 9s feel when it comes to finding their own way. Now, I know that there are some incredibly healthy, independent 9s out there solo adventuring their way through life. I'm gonna let you know you are in the minority of your type, just like a type 1 reformer who's a stand-up comedian. Can it happen? Of course. Any type can be anything because Enneagram types aren't personality prisons. They're just a compass pointing us in the general direction of our healthiest self. And for 9s, their ego keeps telling them to put that compass in their back pocket and follow someone else who's more confident about where they're going. And that's the major draw for many 9s in a relationship with a type 8 challenger who is constantly charging after what they want in life with such utter certainty that the 9 feels like they can just kind of slide into the background of the 8's life. After all, the relational disappearing act is one of the 9's trademark behaviors, as it's a great way to avoid taking any risk that may fracture the sense of stability that comes so easily from standing in the shadow of the big, strong 8. Okay, I know I've painted the 9's attraction to the 8 in a kind of negative light up until this point, but there are plenty of healthy 9s that fall in love with 8s because they both admire and seek to embody the 8's confidence, rather than hide behind it. Healthy 9s also have a knack for creating a safe space where the 8 feels comfortable exposing their more emotionally vulnerable side. And again, many 8s are big ol' softies at their core and can be super lovey-dovey, which is usually the version of the 8 that 9s first fall in love with. That's also the version of the 8 that the 9 gets to experience more often at home, where the 8 feels more secure letting their softer side out, mostly because no one's watching. Okay, last thing worth noting here is that 9s can be very attracted to the way that 8s enforce strong boundaries in their life. 9s can have a really hard time standing up for themselves and are often overly passive, so the 8's willingness to make difficult yet necessary decisions can help inspire the 9 to create healthy boundaries with people that may otherwise take advantage of them. Speaking of relational tension and healthy boundaries, it's time to move on from points of attraction and talk about what causes conflict between 8s and 9s. Hey there, friend. Looks like you're a little more than halfway through this Enneagram relationship episode, which means it's a great time to not only watch this fancy little neon graphic float off into the distance, but to hit those like and subscribe buttons, you know? You know what I mean? You know those buttons that are sitting right there? Don't be coy, you know where they are. You know, if you're feeling non-committal, you can just hit the like button. It's still really helpful. Okay, let's get back to it. Conflict in the 8-9 relationship can be very surprising. Mostly for the 8, that usually begins the relationship thinking that the 9 is so accommodating and will pretty much fall in line with whatever the 8 wants. But as it turns out, even the profound patience of the 9 has its limits, and once the 9 has had enough, they start to withdraw from the 8, both physically and emotionally. Now, this withdrawal from the 8 triggers their deep fear of abandonment, and so they often meet the 9 with increased aggression rather than an earnest hope for reconciliation. It's important to remember that as strong as 8s can be, they are extremely sensitive about the loyalty they expect from their loved ones. And since they spend the least amount of time cultivating their heart space, they get really thrown off by the heavy emotions that arise when the 9 finally pushes back against their control. To be fair though, from the 8's perspective, the relationship has been like a reliable car running smoothly for years, and then all of a sudden, the engine just drops out. That engine is the 9's participation in the relationship. And unfortunately, 9s are just so conflict avoidant that they often give no warning signs of how unhappy or entirely unfulfilled they are in the relationship until they're just about ready to explode. 9s often just stay put, and they cope, as I mentioned earlier, by focusing on all the positives in order to block out the negatives. Unfortunately for 9s, the 8 won't let them pretend that things are better than they are, because 8s are reactive types that believe it's important to show your anger when you're upset so that people know how serious you are and that they best get in line. Now, as things deteriorate, this couple often gets trapped in a cycle of the 8's domineering pursuit and the 9's passive yet stubborn resistance of the 8's control. It's pretty much what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Now, the biggest red flag for this couple is when things get so antagonistic that the 9's deep, dormant pool of rage finally erupts and they give the 8 a run for their money in terms of insults and injuries given. That may sound crazy to those of you that have only met 9's in polite company, but all gut types struggle with anger. Now, it's not as surprising when you look at 8's and 1's, but as the impinge type within the gut center, 9's have the hardest time both acknowledging and processing their anger. So it has this tendency to explode out unexpectedly when the 9 is under some serious stress. Anyway, the important thing to take away from all this is that anger drives the 8's aggression as much as it drives the 9's avoidance. Okay, all that is just one potential outcome for a couple that's unwilling to work things out. And there are plenty of things the 8-9 couple can do to avoid those kind of relationship pitfalls and live into their healthiest relationship possible. So on that note, let's wrap things up with a little relationship advice tailored specifically for the 8-9 pairing. All right, the first piece of advice I'd give to this couple is to stay active. As I've mentioned several times in this episode already, 8's and 9's are both gut types that are at their best when they stay present and connected to their physical bodies. Now for 9's, you tend to slip into some mindless routines because it gets you physically active but keeps you from really engaging with the outside world. So just notice if it's been a while since you went out and did something that really makes you come alive, like taking a sunrise hike or playing basketball or working in the garden. Usually it's something that you grew up doing that you've just kind of gotten away from over time. Now, for 8's, it's usually a lot less difficult to motivate physical activity, but you still tend to live in this mindset of work hard, play hard, where you run yourself into the ground, both being productive and engaging in some wild or reckless fun. So the goal is to find moderation and to do something that gets you into more of a flow state rather than an intense or indulgent experience. This will also create opportunities for the 9 to come alongside you and participate in activities that aren't so overwhelmingly difficult or exhausting. And that leads me to my next tip, which is to find or create a dedicated time and place to express what's on your heart. It doesn't have to be therapy. It can just be some place where the 9 can feel safe expressing more than just their positive emotions, and the 8 can practice expressing more than just their frustration. Also, the more that 8's are in touch with their softer emotions, the less they tend to overemphasize this calloused idea of tough love, which is often just a way of subverting their fear of rejection as they get to push against you before you can push against them. On the flip side, 9's need to practice engaging with more than just positive or neutral feelings, and trust that the 8 is actually encouraged when the 9 expresses their frustration, as it makes the 8 feel like the 9 is willing to actually fight for the relationship. And you know, fighting can be a kind of foreplay for 8's, so just say what's on your mind, 9's, and then go have some fun. Okay, my last piece of advice is mostly for the 8, and it's to make sure the 9 gets a win every once in a while. Many 8's don't even realize how often they're bulldozing over the 9's desires because they rarely speak up when they don't get their way. Now, that should also be a reminder to the 9 to speak up when you don't get your way, since the more you fade into the background, the less the 8 is going to see or respect you, and that's just a recipe for the cycle of conflict we just discussed. All right, that's enough advice for today. I hope it was helpful, and if it wasn't, well, then this last section really isn't going to help because it's time to end things as we always do with these relationship episodes, and that's with the YGAT relationship rating system. All right, first up on the YGAT relationship rating system is the spice meter, and while 8's always add a good amount of spice to their relationships, the 9's more peaceful demeanor definitely lowers the temperature a bit. Although 9's can have an 8 wing and that adds some unexpected heat, so I'm gonna go right in the middle at medium spice. Maybe just a hair over if it's a 9 wing 8. Next up is the power meter. And again, I'm gonna put this couple somewhere around the middle because 8's are super hardworking and 9's are great collaborators, but this couple normally prefers a simple life to an ambitious one. I say that mostly because this couple often has a desire for a mixture of autonomy and security that can make them live off the grid in some sort of self-sufficient or minimalistic way. All right, last up is the fun meter, which is a bit tricky because it really depends on if the 8 is one of those all work and no play kind of 8s, or if they're super adventurous, because the 9 is pretty much going to follow their lead. So to be safe, I'm again going to put them right in the middle at international escapades. Lord knows the 8 is going to go hard on vacation whenever they actually decide to take one. All right, friends, there you have it. The Enneagram 8-9 relationship. A medium spice, fairly productive, yet often minimalistic couple that can have as much fun as the 8 will let them. That's a wrap on this relationship combo episode for the Type 8 Challenger with a Type 9 Peacemaker. If you're shutting it down here, then I will say thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and please hit the like and subscribe buttons for me on your way out. But hey, if you're sticking around for more Enneagram goodness, then I have got plenty of relationship-themed content for you to choose from right here, as well as some more lighthearted content if you need a mental breather. Take your pick.